Chairman Scott and committee, my name is Elaine Price, District 4, Coeur d'Alene, and I bring before you House Joint Resolution 7. This legislation is creating a question to the citizens of Idaho if they want to repeal Section 5, Article 9 of the Idaho Constitution. This section is prohibition of sectarian appropriations, or the Blaine Amendment. So let's go into some background on the Blaine Amendment. James Blaine was a congressman from Maine who was anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, and he served from 1830 to 1893. During this time, Protestants ran the public schools. And many of their Protestant practices were occurring in the schools at the time. Catholics had started a school system, and that school system was pretty much just as large as the public school system. They were asking for public money to help with their schools. Blaine, who had hatred for the Catholic Irish immigrants, worked to get this sectarian appropriation law into effect. It basically represented his sentiment of bigotry towards this group. Blaine tried to get this amendment done federally into the federal Constitution, and it failed. He was such a powerful man in Congress that he was able to convince states to put it in their constitutions, and that's part of the reason why Idaho has it in their constitution, because when they joined the Union, they felt, a lot of states felt pressured to put this Blaine Amendment in their constitution to be able to be part of the Union. Since the Protestants controlled the public schools, they did not seem to see any harm in putting this amendment into their constitutions. They didn't have the foresight to know that the Protestants wouldn't be running the school systems in the future. There have been many Supreme Court decisions: Trinity v. Comer, Espinoza v. Montana, Carson v. Macon, Loffman v. California, that have ruled that withholding from a religious entity because it's religious violates free exercise rights. Blaine amendments are assumably unconstitutional when they target and discriminate against religion. States cannot justify scrutiny as there is no compelling interest that supports blanket exclusion of religious institutions from neutral programs. This is how state constitutions conflict with the U.S. Constitution. A recent court case here in Idaho has shown not only is the use of the Blaine Amendment by state discrimination, it also puts state decision makers in a position of choosing to uphold the Blaine Amendment or the U.S. Constitution. When they choose to uphold the Blaine Amendment, the state loses in court under the U.S. Constitution and the Free Exercise Clause. Again, this resolution puts a question before the state electorate to repeal the amendment. We do not make that decision as a body. I've heard we should let the voters decide what they want, and I'm asking just that. I ask you to send House Joint Resolution 7 to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Thank you for that. Does the committee have any questions? Representative Skog.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Price, I've just finished a book on some Idaho history and some of the things about this. My understanding that Idaho also accepted this Blaine Amendment type in our Constitution because of the strong anti-Mormon bigotry at the time. Is that true?
Representative Price?
In researching this, they don't specifically mention that, but Idaho had it so that the Mormons couldn't even vote until we repealed that part of it. So I'm thinking that yes, that has some play into why Idaho has a Blaine Amendment.
Representative Mickelson.
Madam Chairman and Representative Price, so a couple questions here. I guess the first one would be, do you see then that it would be okay for the state and you as a state representative then to allocate to, say, a Muslim school for schools teaching Sharia law if we revoke this?
Representative Price.
Madam Chair and Representative, that's not what this legislation is doing. This legislation is asking the people of Idaho if they want to repeal this. So this is putting it up to the people of Idaho if they want to repeal this. It has nothing to do with funding. It has to do whether we are going to discriminate against a specific religion or not. But ultimately, all this legislation is doing is putting the question before the people. So that's a question the people need to decide.
Representative Mickelson?
Follow up on that. I guess then the question becomes is if we start giving state funds to, say, schools, we're using state funds and we're going to start paying directly to schools, if I'm envisioning this correctly, then would the state have the ability to then go in and start auditing churches and dictating policy if in fact you remove the Blaine Amendment from our Constitution? So then you have a situation, because public tax dollars are involved, that then you start to have influence from the state legislature into a religious school into a religious school.
Representative Price, I think if you want, I don't know if I heard a question, so.
No, I did
Was
have
that
a question. So my question is then if we remove this, what are the consequences of doing that in relation to public tax dollars going to private schools, to religious private schools, and how would the state then make sure or protect public tax dollars to make sure that they weren't being misused? Because then you might have an intermingling of church and state.
Representative Price?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. So a couple of things in that. The U.S. Supreme Court has made it perfectly clear that if we give out funds, we have to be neutral. We cannot discriminate against a certain sect. They've made that very clear. I've listed several of the cases. It's specifically happened in Idaho, which I believe there's a testifier that's going to give you some more background on that. That is something that is going to have to be worked out if the people of Idaho choose to repeal this. But it has been made perfectly clear by the Supreme Court that we cannot discriminate based on religion. And there's also state funds already going to religious institutions. Our launch program goes to religious institutions. So we're already hitting that gray area.
Do you have a follow-up?
A follow-up question and comment. I think in the case of the Blaine Amendment, it was specific to K-12 schools. It wasn't necessarily applicable to colleges. And in the case of our Constitution, they were pretty specific that they didn't want one religion or another of the two religions, the Catholics and the Mormons, having an outsized control. So if that's the case, how would you make sure that all religious faiths would then get equal funding so that you wouldn't have a discriminatory situation where, because you had, say it was the Protestants or the Baptists, had the prominent religious schools, and you had other minority schools that were religious as well? How would you make sure that that money got funded equally between those?
Representative Price?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. Once again, that's something that would have to be worked out once this legislation is strictly to put the question before the people. We can discuss the Blaine Amendment, but that is something that we have to discuss among the people who are making the decision on whether they want to repeal it or not. And what happens after that, we'll have to deal with if that decision is made or not. I just want to clarify on our Blaine Amendment. Our Blaine Amendment is one of the most restrictive Blaine Amendments there is out there, and it specifically grants no aid to any sect or religious, so it's not restricted to just K through 12.
Thank you. Representative Haas?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning. For a comment and a follow-up question. The comment is, I think that we all understand the underpinnings and the history of these Blaine Amendments, and that they were, in fact, motivated by religious animus. There's no getting around that ugly history. That aside, the history of how something comes into being doesn't dictate what it actually says. And so I do want to point out that the Blaine Amendment that we have applies broadly across any church or religious society or to any religious purpose, and that it aligns very closely with the foundational principles of our democratic republic, which are to keep church and state separate because, for reasons that Representative Mickelson points out, there is a danger of one particular group gaining power and influence over others. And our country was founded because people were escaping religious persecution at the hands of a majority religion. So with that, I want to ask if the Blaine Amendment is repealed, how do we maintain the boundaries between religious institutions and the government sufficient to prevent the very situation that people were fleeing Europe for America when our country was founded?
Representative Price, if you want to.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. We have the establishment clause, but there is no I agree with you that there is a perceived separation of church and state, but the state cannot establish a religion. So I don't think the state choosing to not discriminate is establishing a religion. If the state says you can only practice the Baptist faith, then they are establishing a religion. But if they are giving funds to everybody across the board equally, that is not establishing a religion.
Okay, so
have
follow-up.
follow-up? Okay,
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. So to be clear, it would be okay if the state were giving money to religious institutions across the board of all denominations, that's something that you think we should put before the voters to see if Idaho wants to fund, religious schools of all denominations?
Representative Price?
Madam Chair and Representative, no. What I'm putting before the people is a question on whether they want to repeal the Blaine Amendment or not. That's what I'm proposing to put in front of the people.
We're going to move on to Representative Pohanka.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. So, as you had mentioned, you cannot discriminate against religious schools. So, hypothetically, if someone wants to start a satanic school, you could not they would be able to get the monies no matter what, and that has me scared. So, I just, I look at that, I'm thinking, that has me worried.
Representative Price?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. Once again, I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future. I don't know how this is going to look. All I can tell you is that I feel that the people have a right to make a decision, and I can tell you how we've been applying it in the state of Idaho has cost taxpayers money because the state of Idaho has been sued because of religious discrimination because they're not applying the law equally across the board, or that they're not allowing equal access across the board.
Representative Crane.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Representative Price. So I'm hearing the concerns of the committee that they're struggling with the concern of school of Satan, or Muslim school, I think was another one that was brought up. But I'd like to get rid of this religious persecution, religious bigotry issue, this stain that surrounds the Blaine Amendment. So help me understand, if we were able to do that by repealing the Blaine Amendment, does that immediately then just allow the state to start spending money in religious schools, or is there legislation that would have to follow that would say the state of Idaho is going to allow the Baptist church or the LDS church or whatever to have state dollars flow?
Representative Price, this is perfect for you because you're in JFAC. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. We have, and I don't know if I brought it or not, but we do have another part of our code, of our Constitution. It's farther on in Section 9 that prohibits basically putting one religion over the other. It specifically says it in our Idaho Constitution. So to me, I felt that there was still a protection within our Constitution that helps the state to not promote one religion over the other. I personally, and I can't see the future. I don't see a bunch of religious schools running and trying to get money. Basically, what this states and what the Supreme Court has ruled is if the state has a program that they offer, that they cannot, if a religious school applies, they can't say, you can't get that money because you're a religious school. They have to come up with another reason why it falls under why they can't have that, or they don't qualify for that program. It can't be just stated specifically because they're a religious school. They have to have other parameters on why they don't qualify for programs. So we as a legislature can then institute laws that would put parameters around those programs stating it has to qualify under this, this, or this. So we have options as a legislature to put more guardrails on programs so that more qualifications. Did that answer your question?
Follow up?
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Price. We'll try again. So let's just type a hypothetical here. If this goes to the voters in 26, the voters repeal the Blaine Amendment and this horrific religious persecution, religious bigotry that surrounds this issue, so we remove it. In the year 2027 or 2028, is money automatically going to flow to private schools, Christian schools? Or would there have to be legislation enacted by this body to enable them to have that money flow?
Go ahead, Representative Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Crane. Yeah, you are correct. Money is not going to automatically flow.
Thank you.